random video presentation. Yay. Anyway, so much stupid stuff. So this guy who did the, whatever it was, this guy made another video. Hardcore materialism is ridiculous. So all he does is keep saying, it's ridiculous, it's ridiculous, he doesn't demonstrate it with any, like, convincing argument. And he posts a link to this Chalmers guy who's, doing a TED Talk. Boring. Didn't say anything to this whole first part. And then now he's starting to get to it, which is, ooh, consciousness must be something in the universe. And yeah, it's little stuff, consciousness stuff, like quantum stuff. It's really there, we just can't see it. It's a special consciousness juice. And, we collect it. We have a whole bunch of consciousness juice in our head. Brilliant. Anyway, great explanation. Ooh, yeah, Ooh, oh yeah, I totally get that. Anyway, so anyway, this guy, back to him, basically saying something like, you can't explain it, if you're a materialist, that somehow you're obliged, logically, not to think pain matters, which is idiotic. There's absolutely nothing to do with, materialism has nothing to do with saying, I'm just going to pretend something that we know exists doesn't exist. There's no obligation to do that. And if somebody's going to make pain just poof away, that might as well be a religious theory, right? It's as bad as making an angel is to take something that we know exists, something we know happens. It's real events. The event is real. What the event might be made out of might not be real, but the event is real. Tricky, right? But not really. And make it go away. So creating a god is no different than taking something that we know happens and pretending it didn't happen. Pretending it's the same thing. And so that's the flaw in these assholes' logic, is this pretense that they just make it go away. So anyway, I guess what I'll focus on is this comment by this camouflage monkey who's a real jerk. Obviously. I don't know what this means. Fuck nihilists? I don't know. Anyway. Sorry, still dealing with the ears. Alright, so yeah, I'll just read these. There's two comments. One I'm on nihilism and one I'm on this trolling stuff. So we'll get to this. I don't get this. You kick Logic and Vic for only one obviously sarcastic comment. Now, it seems a little coincidental though, right? He posts an idiotic comment. Let's troll and blah blah blah. LOL. And he posted twice because I guess somebody put it in the spam thing and I took it out of the spam things, but he posted it again. Like it was such an important joke to tell. And just coincidentally, this happens at exactly the same time when the rooms get spammed with music and porn and all this stuff. It actually gets Flyora a strike on her account. And it's just a coincidence. Now, if it is just a coincidence, it doesn't really matter, because clearly it is a stupid thing to say anywhere. It's like walking into somebody's barn and talking about, wow, this wheat sure looks like it would catch fire easy. I wonder if somebody would light all this stuff on fire. I wonder if somebody could do that with a match or something, and gasoline, a little bit of gas, and it's, why would somebody do that? Oh yeah, they'd have to be an asshole. So, whatever. Sarcastic comment. If he was serious, he wouldn't have posted it public and for Gary and everybody to read. Again, that logic doesn't go anywhere. Why, if he wasn't serious, would he post it? Why would you post it? So that logic doesn't go anywhere. It's a stupid thing to even talk about, let alone do. But if you're willing to talk about it, it seems like you're probably more likely to do it. Get it? Yeah. even though they've been very polite fellow. Well, the point is that maybe they haven't been. Maybe they are, as they appear to be, fakes, just playing games on the internet. In Hangouts, who certainly take philosophical thinking more serious than most other YouTube anti-nihilists. So again, it doesn't seem very polite to be making those kind of comments on somebody's video. So that's not very polite. And always try to put through into their arguments. And obviously they're you know, this whole idea that you can politely insult other people's intelligence, insult their character, and that somehow that's polite because they didn't use the word asshole. Again, that's just only somebody really stupid doesn't understand that not all insults are made in bad language. Some of them can be very articulate and use very fancy words, but they're doing exactly the same thing. They're just fucking insults, asshole. And at the same time, you're not only tolerant but admire men who can't make an argument without wrongfully insulting, well, that's your accusation that you don't back up with a fact, or shouting at someone. Yeah, again, shouting is, how is that wrong? I'm sorry, I think it's just a normal response when people say outrageously stupid things to elevate the conversation with emphasis. He really comes across as a bully sometimes. So I don't, you know, that's your account, again, based on what? What I come across, in my opinion, what I do, in my opinion, is defend things being raped by malicious assholes. And they rape the truth, they rape the real circumstance, they rape fair premises. They're rapists. You've raped the word bad, and you're going to do it in this idiotic comment of yours. You have no respect for the truth. Denied the Holocaust. Well, that's another accusation. You're going to back it up with something? I deny that you can kill 6 million Jews in fucking gas chambers. Yeah, that I deny. And burn them. And the sentience of babies in the past. Well, again, you're claiming babies are sentient based on what evidence? And if they are sentient, then why don't you pass a law telling women they can't have natural childbirth because it's way too traumatic on the baby? So why don't you do that? If you think babies actually are experiencing sensations and they're actually suffering, then when their skull gets compressed going through the birth canal, why don't you do the babies a favor and spare them that torture? It's made tons of other bullshit claims. You say they're bullshit. Where's your evidence? Oh, that's right, you don't have any. And last but not least, keeps ranting against his misinterpretation of moral nihilism. Again, I haven't misinterpreted moral nihilism. You can't seem to understand what the concept of a bad is. You think a bad is a neutral. You think bad means an absence of profit. Yeah, so if you're not gaining, somehow that means that's the bad. The bad isn't actually losing. It's not gaining. For a year now or whatever, without even attempting to understand the basic concept of the is-ought gap. Well, no, the basic concept of the is-ought gap is just a contrivance of nonsense. And clearly there's an is-ought gap with all of reality, except the only pertinent part, which would be things that have intrinsic value. There's only an ought when it's intrinsically valuable, and there's only one thing intrinsically valuable, and that's bad. The one word you've eliminated from vocabulary. Well, eliminate the true meaning of. You think bad is neutral. For 5 minutes, even though people try to explain to him over and over again, and they all get back to him, are insults again. Well, again, no, they provide insults just as you have. Your whole accusation that I have somehow misinterpreted or not understood because you have an idiotic theory that bad isn't really bad isn't my fault, asshole. That's your fault. So again, why do you have patience for Gary but not Vic? Well, again, I don't make asshole rude comments, and in the second place, I don't coincidentally suggest let's going on a trolling mission at the very time a bunch of trolls show up. So yeah, I don't have his liabilities, quite obviously. So anyway, this is not bad by Numbly Numb. Their convictions all stem from one simple faulty premise: the inference that the genocide, slavery, and systematic torture, degradation, and exploitation of most of the world's sentient life forms is perfectly rational, so long as those who impose it consider it to be valuable and have made its actualization their personal goal. I'm happy to report that I can't follow that logic. And right, that's the effectively the theory of the nihilist, is that I will just do what I feel, and what I feel is somehow naturally perfect. There's no criticisms or judgments necessary. There's no such thing as intelligence that must filter, test my emotional character. There's no intelligence to be applied because we don't know what a bad is. Anyway, you're wrong. Moral nihilists don't believe in universally rational actions. Right, so you don't believe in exactly the same thing, that there would be actions to be rational have to have purposes, and purposes would have to be somehow fundamental. And so you don't believe there's a fundamental purpose, which means there's not a fundamental meaning to something like bad that has to be fixed. There's no such thing as broken, essentially. Where people who believe there's such a thing as broken understand that broken needs to be fixed. That's what intelligence does. Intelligence finds things that aren't good and fixes them. Action and moral judgments are always dependent on personal goals and values. So actions are always dependent on personal goals and values. Personal goals and values fed or fueled by what? Again, I would argue that most of my personal goals, most of my personal values have been edified by knowledge of the world and how it works. And that's why my personal goals have changed. It's because my personal goal is to understand the world, and my understanding has told me that these other things that feel, which I don't personally have any connection to, actually have value, period. And I'm obliged to consider their welfare, whether I feel something for them or not. I used to believe moral nihilism was wrong until I spent some time listening to their arguments. Why would you believe it was wrong if it's so purely obvious? And thinking about it recently, the problem is that Gary takes their arguments out of context. In what way? And completely misrepresents them. Liar. Again, you can't prove any of this nonsense. I've made my simple argument why I'm not a moral nihilist. I arrived on Earth. I had sensations. I recognized they are decidedly good and bad in and of themselves. I don't make them good or bad. They're just obnoxious, okay? Pain is obnoxious all by itself. I don't have to make it bad. It makes itself known as bad. And I just recognize that's the boogeyman. That's the good and bad thing happening, are the sensations. And it just doesn't matter where sensation is. It's always the same thing. Good sensations are good. Bad sensations are bad. Doesn't matter what vessel they happen to be occupying. They're a thing. The sensation itself is the thing. The vessels are irrelevant. Out of context, misrepresented. You can't learn anything about moral nihilism by watching amendment videos. Well, I mean, you can, if in the sense that I will show you a moral nihilist, and I'll show you what they do. And I'll show you how they convert the word bad into the word not good. There are two false statements that he keeps repeating. Nihilists deny the difference between suffering, nail in the eye, and pleasure, cupcake. No, they do. They don't. You can objectively say that suffering feels bad. Well, again, it feels bad. It is bad, right? And pleasure feels good for another individual in a specific or all cases. In a specific or all cases. Well, again, the point is the feeling bad is the bad thing. The feeling good is the good thing. So again, you want to change which one causes which. It doesn't really matter. The end product is there's feeling good and there's feeling bad. And if you agree that it's bad, then it needs to be corrected. But you can't come to a normative, moral conclusion regarding your own actions out of that unless you have a personal relation. So again, this guy's saying somehow you have to empathy to mental states of others. Why do I have to have any of that? So you're just making a declarative statement. You're saying it is the truth, that the only way you can understand somebody else's pain or something, you have to feel their pain in some way, or you have to empathize or some kind of crap like that. When no, you don't. You just have to recognize it and respect it. So if you respect the idea that it's bad and you see it happening, you don't need any empathy. You just need the understanding that that's a bad thing happening. So wrong. Yeah, entirely. Suffering is a negative. Okay, here we go. A negative is a deficit that needs to be fixed. So that's a quoting me. There's no implication that we ought to fix negative states. So again, that's because you don't think negative is negative. Again, there's no point in saying the word, like somehow you know what a negative state is and I know what a negative state is, when you're using completely different language to describe a negative state. You're not saying a negative state is a negative. And now you'll demonstrate it. Try this example, which again, making metaphors or analogies to something that is singularly unique in the universe as far as we know. There's no other thing to compare consciousness to, sensation to, feelings to. There's nothing else like them in the universe. A full glass of positive, I guess that's glass. An empty glass is negative. There you go. So you think, you think an empty glass, which is nothing, is the same as a negative. Do you understand how you just exposed yourself, so to speak? Why would I fix an empty glass? There's nothing wrong with an empty glass. How have you positively respected the sense of urgency of badness by calling something empty or lacking good? Being absent of good fluid. That's not the description of a negative. When you walk into a bar and see someone having an empty glass in front of them, where do you see any imperative implication that you ought to refill the glass? So again, why would I? Because that's essentially comparing it to a zero state, not a necessary state. So if you made the analogy oxygen, all right, something that the individual needs to breathe and they're suffocating, now ask me the question. I see somebody suffocating because you've emptied their oxygen out of their thing. They have an empty glass bulb, globe. And I can easily just hit the button to refill them. You're saying I don't have any imperative to press the button? There's bad happening. The individual's suffering. They're suffocating to death. Of course I do. Because it's bad. To fix the deficit, so to say, makes no sense. Well, to you it makes no sense. To me it makes infinite sense. So that's the difference between me and you. To me, I can't make any sense of saying I know what a negative sensation is, and now I will ignore that understanding that it's negative, the extent of its negative, the brutality of its negativeness, and I will just ignore it. Why would I do that? Again, my logic to you is, why would I see a distinction between a machine that makes conscious experiences and a machine that makes conscious experiences? Why would I think this one matters, this one being comfortable, and that one doesn't matter whether it's comfortable? I either have to believe they both matter or neither matter, but I can't logically make a distinction. So as soon as you're making a distinction, you failed, and in my opinion, you're a liar if you say it doesn't matter to you. So there's only the third. Curtain number 3 is the only one to pick. They both matter. And they both matter equally. Okay. It should be pointed out that moral nihilists don't believe in the is-ought gap because they like to, or because they don't own morals or because they think we should abandon morals. No, you're selfish cunts looking for excuses. They believe in the Zod gap because it's a logical conclusion. Why is it logical? Again, I don't understand. I come to Earth, I feel sensations. The bad ones are decidedly bad in and of themselves. Nasty motherfuckers. And they're nasty motherfuckers no matter what brain they're in. That's just logical. I've already decided that. That's also logical. I can find no logical excuse to think it matters when it's happening to me and it doesn't matter when it's happening to him. So I'm just saying there's no way I can evade it, that truth. And you're saying somehow you're being honest to the truth to say, no, I'll make theirs disappear and keep mine as important. Or somehow you're lying and saying, I don't think either one are important. Fuck you. Because it's a logical conclusion. It's a sad truth, so to say. Why would it be sad? I think it'd be an kick-ass truth. I wish this nonsense of yours was true. I wish it was true that either all the other individuals' pain and suffering isn't real pain and suffering, or that mine wasn't. I mean, I wish I could say that was true, but I can't. The negative does exist. The universe made it. It's a fact, and it's the worst, most horrid fact in the universe. From my perspective, ethics are built upon 3 axioms. Well, who cares? You're an asshole. Empathy, pity, which, you know, evolutionary function. Again, yeah, evolutionary bigoted function. Okay, a function developed out of bigotry for kind, you know, to perpetuate a specific kind of DNA molecule, has nothing to do with intelligence. Avoiding the feeling of guilt, probably psychological mechanism developed from our cultural history. No, feelings of guilt is really, the word is kind of fucked up, is acknowledgement of failure. So when you acknowledge failure, you feel guilty. That's what it is. The categorical imperative as a mutual contract. Yeah, right, whatever. Political. If the participants in a society can hurt each other, then none should hurt anyone, so I can live my life. Whatever that means. Social contract. Yeah, well, whatever. That's a whole different subject. We're talking about absolutes and the existence of net end game resolution of what took place. And the fact is, the fact that we have to make all these contracts to be able to even survive, to have the conversation with each other, is just makes it messy. It doesn't make it a better game. It doesn't make it more logical. It's an impediment to logical directness, is this assholery that we have to indulge in all these conversations with idiots. None of these come from real logic, but are rather connected to a personal interest. And exactly, which is, in my opinion, illogical. Life isn't personal. Life is happening to many organisms, so it would be idiotic for me to think that anything about the reality of being alive just has to do with my personal interest. That would be just silly. But if someone, let's say, is a super intelligent psychopath, which isn't really possible, super intelligent harmer of things, no, not possible, who otherwise understands everything, denies these axioms, then you can't explain to him why he should act moral. There's no moral logic without personal subjective interest. Again, no, that's just not true. The fact that you have to believe in your beliefs emotionally for you to act is, yeah, a fact. Your level of confidence, probably not the right concept to deal with, just confidence alone. But the fact that you have to make it personal, but the personal interest is devotion to something simple like the truth. If you're devoted to the truth, then logical principles are fundamentally very important to you personally. Subjective interest in the well-being of others. Here's something I wrote down recently. Wow, how exciting. Suffering is bad for the sufferer. Here we go again. So again, it's not in the universe. It doesn't happen as an event in the universe. It's not bad in and of itself. It's not bad intrinsically. It's not bad. Right? The sufferer's suffering can be acknowledged by the observer to be labeled objectively as bad for the sufferer. Well, again, bad for the sufferer, the suffering, but it isn't real suffering because it's not in the universe. It's only in the sufferer. So again, it didn't happen in the universe. This is just such crap. Nothing wrong here, but this doesn't say how the observer values his reaction to the sufferer's suffering. Well, his reaction to the suffering is irrelevant. His acknowledgement of its existence is all that's required. Once he's acknowledged the existence of something exactly the same as what he experiences as suffering, and he knows his suffering is bad, then he knows what's happening over there is bad. And now bad has happened, and bad must be fixed, just like it must be fixed when it happens to me. If the observer is empathetic and capable of feeling pity, which again, in my opinion, has nothing to do with this subject, the sufferer's suffering is bad for him and bad for me, I ought to stop it. Well, again, you just said here, the sufferer's suffering is bad for him and bad for me. So you're saying that it has to be bad for you before you'll acknowledge its existence, before you'll act as if you acknowledged its existence. Merely acknowledging the existence of bad isn't good enough for you. If the observer is apathetic and doesn't care, well, again, to be apathetic would have to require you not to think it's bad. So again, you're just taking away the word bad either way. You don't think bad is really bad, period. You don't understand that bad is bad, which means it's a negative, which means it has to be corrected logically. It's unacceptable. Bad is not the acceptable condition. It's an unacceptable condition. The sufferer's suffering is bad for him and neutral for me. Well, again, so you're saying that this neutral for me part somehow is more logical because you don't have any, you're emotionally neutral. It means you still don't understand it's bad. Like I said, I was pretty emotionally neutral on the whole subject of Jews and this and that and all that kind of crap. But that didn't change the fact that I could recognize the horrible conditions and the awful suffering. So it had nothing to do with who was doing it. It had to do with the fact that it was happening and it was bad. Period. I didn't ought to do anything. I don't ought to do anything. Again, this whole idea that you've neutralized bad into nothing. You've just said bad is a neutral condition. You've said you feel neutral, therefore bad must be neutral. You've said your reaction, your emotional reaction, which is neutral, I don't feel anything, therefore nothing must be happening. When intellectually I know something's happening. So you're saying that somehow you can know intellectually that something bad is happening, but because you don't feel like something bad's happening, you won't act. Then you're stupid. If the observer is a sadist, well again, then he's an idiot. The sufferer's suffering is bad for him and good for me. Well, again, that's your interpretation of value exchanges, which has to do with everybody feeling instead of anybody thinking. Frankly, I think logically. I don't feel logically. I ought to torture him some more. Even though you know torture's bad, even though you know creating bad is bad, you ought to do it because you feel like it. I mean, that's just stupid. Again, if I would be smart enough, if tomorrow, right now, I had some feeling come up inside of me where I just said, oh, I would just love to torture my neighbor. Ooh, that would feel so cool. I'd love to, like, yeah, stick big, giant, pointy sticks in and out of them and stuff, and blah, 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 blah. I would still logically know, can't do that. It's suffering. You can't call it suffering. Suffering's bad, okay? I'd have a dissidence would be created. The feeling wouldn't be acted on. Anyway, genocide, slavery, and systematic torture, degradation, exploitation are neither rational nor irrational. So all of this bad causing stuff, all this stuff causing bad sensations, you know they're bad because you've experienced them, they're bad sensations, you can't tell the rational difference between a world where you don't create them and a world where you do create them. I say you're an idiot. But it depends on us, the ones with empathy. Well, I don't think you have any empathy in the first place. I don't think you have any emotional character. But you're an imbecile, so what good is it? Who cares what your emotional character is when you can't guide it with any kind of intelligence? And I'm going to make again my argument. I was born without emotional character. I acquired emotional character through intelligence, through knowledge of reality. And so the fact that if you're going to claim you don't have empathy, you could only not have empathy because you don't understand what's happening. To stop these crimes in favor of our own interest, yeah, in favor of our own interest, yeah, like always doing the right thing is profitable. Personally, it's always, that's the way the world really works, right? That it's always in your own self-interest to do the right thing. Everything will be just fine. Just be a randy and selfish cunt, and everything will work out just great. Fuck you. And not let psychopaths, well, you are a psychopath, take over again. But again, it all comes from feelings, not logic. That statement itself, it all comes from feelings, not logic, is the same thing as saying feelings versus intelligence. Logic is a function, an intelligent function. Logic isn't a feeling function. You don't do feeling logic. You do thought and understanding. You manipulate concepts and descriptions of reality with logic. That's what logic works with. Feelings are silly opinions at best, and gobbledygook at worst. Useless mush, glue, bigotry, crap. Anyway, fuck you people. Alright, yeah, so I'll just add my little blah 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 here. There's another guy whining, this guy who trolls in the comments. I was expecting the warning to be because of something they said or did in Let's Draw. Well, we don't know what they did or in Mike's room, but I've been called a child molester, scum of the earth, and a million nasty ad hominem attacks. Yeah, I'm calling you what you represent as a philosophy, okay, which is self-indulgent, ignorant, emotionalism, by a fellow A.N. Emendem, and he is still allowed in. Well, yeah, an emotional anti-nihilist, again, let's recognize, isn't any better than a Nazi. I mean, you know, the bigotry against the Jews isn't any better than his bigotry. He's saying, I have an emotional problem with life, therefore everybody else should be obliged to satisfy my emotional agenda. He's not making a rational argument for AN. He's making an irrational, personal, subjective, emotional defense. He's basically saying everybody should like what I like. Fuck you. You either demonstrate it, if you're going to impose on somebody, you either do it with a logical argument or you don't do it. So if you can't logically defend AN, you have no business attempting to impose anything on anybody. If you can't logically defend your action, you can't justify acting against anyone else's interests. Period. Based on your emotions. It's just absolute bullshit. Yeah, that's enough of that. Alright, so I just thought I'd go a little on this brain science thing. So, what I would argue is the neurons are just reflexes, okay? So let's just understand the first neuron was just a way to expedite reaction time. So electricity moves faster than chemistry, so the neuron happened because it creates an electrical way to create action at one end and action at another end of an organism. And then this knee-jerk, this reactive element, ended up being cascaded. So they would be thought triggers. If this, do this knee-jerk. If that, do this knee-jerk. So all this if questioning thing started happening. And so it started making this cascade of reflexes. The beginnings of a brain. Now, in the development of this reflexive mechanism, we ended up with all our senses. All our senses are neuron-based senses. Okay, neurons run from the tip of our fingers all the way up to our brain, a single neuron. There are very long neurons are some of the biggest cells in your body. They're very long. Our eyes, our hearing, it's all a neuron-based system of sensation. And now these knee jerks, in a sense, especially with eyes, there's this huge amount of information. So yeah, the first eyeball just said, yeah, daylight, no daylight. You know, lights on, lights off. And then it started seeing more and more detail. It started refining how much because there's so much to glean out of the environment. A ton of information. And essentially the brain, the neural network, the complexity of this arrangement, started modeling the world as representations, as neural packets. So there was little bits of neurons that started now being a representation of tree, our sky, our bird. You know, so then things got categorized as food and threat, and put into different categories, in a sense. And this little model of reality in our brain would play, and it would feed our behavior based on our experience. Now, the only way that can really work is there has to be some way to, for it to learn actively. There has to be some way to have a reward and punishment system. There has to be value. But anyway, so just think of it as this idea that it's just creating a mental model. Now, your brain right now, if it wanted to, it could give you the illusion of a steel ball floating right in front of me here. My brain could create that. It could create the illusion of it right there in front of me. And it could even probably program my sensations to feel it. So I can not only see it, but feel it. My brain probably is capable of creating a delusion that real, where it makes me really think it's a real thing in the world. But it's just synthesized in my brain. See? Get this? Your brain attempts to model reality because that's what works over time. Good representations of reality work. That's why we don't have a bunch of fake things in our world. Is because it was so much more efficient as a machine if it didn't make fake things. But the trick was, fake material things. Fake trees for us to avoid. Why would we avoid a fake tree? That kind of thing. You know what I mean? The brain just didn't bother with that because there was so much value in seeing reality that it didn't fuck with it. But the part it did fuck with was the value part. Value is like a little steel ball. It's a thing it could place in our world. So in our model, it synthesized this fake thing called pain and pleasure. These are not real things in the world, but they're real in our model. And that's the part that matters, because we experience the model in our neurology. We're not living in the world. We're living in the model in our brain. And the model in our brain created pain and pleasure. And pain is really all it created, but let's not get into it. It created this noise, this obnoxious sensation. So it fell upon it, probably through experimentation, right? It's modeling the world. It's using these new senses, eyes and ears, and different feelings, tentacles, lots of organisms, different kinds of sensing devices. And these sensations are coming in. It's creating a mental model. And the real point is that once it establishes that it can cover things in our reality with an extra dimension of value. Now we can have a feeling associated with things. And the feeling is this, obnoxiousness, this noise thing. So you could say that the brain just fell on that. It fell on that capacity because it was useful. But it's just a synthesized element of reality. So it doesn't exist in that universe, the real world. It exists in the model our brain has made. But the model our brain has made of reality is in reality. So this new creation of pain is real. It's in reality. It's in a model, but in every sense it's real because it's included in the model of reality. But it's a synthesized perception. It's a synthesized perception in our model. So there's no reason to extract it from reality. And every reason to understand that it's not a representative of something in reality. It's something our brain used. It's a contrivance, a synthetic creation to make us capable of learning and valuing. It creates value, and therefore motivation, imperative, importance, all the big words. Because you can't have that without that synthetic value. So that's when we stop being robots, so to speak. We're still robots, but only not in the so to speak way. We're not robots in the simple way. We're robots in this more complex way, where our robot is really two robots. One creating reality and one reacting to reality. So one part of our brain is manufacturing the model and including the value, and the other part of the brain is reacting to the value enriched reality our brain creates. There. I think that's better than David Chalmers' wanker of an explanation. So anyway, so yes, in a sense, pain is fake, but it's real, because it's actually a thing in the universe. It's a synthetic, created instrument. It'd be good if it was in the world. If it was just automatic, that you could recognize a bad circumstance was that bad circumstance just written on it. You could just read it and say, oh, I'm a computer, bad circumstance means it's bad, needs to be corrected. Okay, I'll fix that. But it doesn't do that. Instead, instead of painting bad circumstance, we feel bad circumstance. Alright, so that's enough said. So till next time, and such. No bigger idiot. I mean, really, it's just so much dumber than the religious kooks. And it just demonstrates that, you know, so many atheists are just, they haven't gotten over the bullshit in their heads. You know, they're smart enough to say, I don't like this silly God, but they're not smart enough to say, I don't like God as a concept, because they're just reinventing it. And now they're just making God themselves. Their emotional character is now God, which is just silly. So, till next time.